As our world becomes more complex, we need new solutions. One of the new areas of risk is computer systems. Just look at the news to hear about another cyber attack that has cost an organization millions of dollars. This webinar will help you understand those risks, look at ways to lower your threat level, and provide an insurance solution in case the worst happens. We have two speakers today. First is Julio Munoz, Adventist Risk Management's Client Care Manager. Hi, Julio.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
Good. Also joining us is Andrew Myaing, one of our account executives.
Hello, David, and hello, everyone.
So I think I'll just go ahead and hand this right on over to you.
Thank you, David. And thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about cyber risks and liability. It's a very important and pertinent topic today in this era of technology and the internet. And we've heard so many stories, as David was saying earlier in the news, about organizations, companies getting hacked, losing clients' data, financial data, personal information data. This is a serious problem, and we want to talk to you about how you can protect your organization's IT systems, your clients and your constituents' personal data. And we want to just talk about what risks you might be exposed to and offer you some solutions to minimize those risks. So let's get going. Like I was saying, you know, we use the internet, we use technology for almost everything nowadays. Andrew, the other day, I was driving in the middle of the desert between Phoenix and Prescott, Arizona. Had to make some changes to an air ticket, got on my phone, got an app going, made the changes, provided my credit card information with full trust and confidence, never thought twice about, you know, whether that information would be compromised or the wrong people would get a hold of it.
You never know if your information is secured or not, but we have some assurances. But you know, with technology that we have today, it's so convenient. We are so spoiled by it.
And now we have to safeguard it, and this is a growing problem. One of the leading journals in the insurance industry said recently that if the current trends continue, cyber insurance coverage just may take its place along the core commercial property and casualty package we're talking about, property insurance, auto, fire insurance, and meaning that a business would be foolish to open its doors without it.
Just imagine, with the information that a lot of the organizations have within their own network, how vulnerable you would be if you didn't have a cyber insurance coverage. If something were to happen, how would you respond?
And that's what we want to talk about today. What are the risks, again, that you might incur, and offer you some solutions. And as we get started, let's talk about some of the, just want to go over quickly, some of the terms that we're going to be using today, just so you understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, when we talk about cyber liability, we want to break down the words, and we want to look at first cyber. Basically meaning something that's computer network, which is basically in virtual reality, and used in formation of a compound word like cyber talk, cyber art, cyberspace.
Okay, and we're also going to be talking about a data breach. And a data breach is the intentional or sometimes unintentional release of secure information to an untrusted environment, somebody that's going to be up to no good with that information.
Yeah, and you know, when we're talking about virus, we think of the biological virus, where something that enters your body and then causes damage to your body and so forth. And when we talk about computers, a virus in the computer system, we talk about a computer code that is planted illegally into the system, wanting to cause damage, and also to your system and or network, which basically self-replicates and does harm.
Which is something that's used often for the fourth term, which is denial of service. A denial of service is an attack on a network that's designed to harm or hamper the network by flooding it with that useless traffic. So that often happens with, for example, financial institutions, when you're unable to get into your banking organization's website and perform a transaction or purchase stuff on websites like Amazon and eBay. So those are some of the terms that we'll be using today. And let's jump right in. We'll begin with some cyber facts. A hacker can operate from anywhere in the world. That is the case just like we can check on our smartphones, get on a laptop in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the mountain, on top of the mountains. They can work from everywhere. And there are organized crime rings operating worldwide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You know, when we look at our URLs, we type in www, and basically that www is World Wide Web, meaning that somebody on the other side of the world can have access to you anytime, anywhere. And so with companies, financial institutions, banks, and so forth, being vulnerable, they're open 24 hours 7 from a hacker.
Right. So just as easily as we can access that information, so can someone that does not want, somebody that wants to use it for something illegal. So now this is a surprising fact, Andrew. Over half of the data breaches are carried out by insiders.
Which is very sobering. If you think about it, who is on the inside? Someone who's within your own system, who's trusted, who has some level of security clearance, and who is not a target of such malicious acts.
And it's important to point out here that the church is no exception. The church is just as susceptible to this. We have some of that important information, and so it's worth noting that over half of data breaches are carried out by insiders. Something that's very important and that we need to keep in mind. So what data are we talking about? We're talking about this data that can be compromised. It's personal identifiable information that can identify an individual and give access to, for example, their financial information as well, such as a driver's license.
Yeah, something like a driver's license. If you think about it, what does it have? What information does a driver's license have? It has first your name, first, middle, last, which identifies who you are. It could also have a driver's license number, which basically reference you to that number, and it could also have a date of birth. And you know that when you look at someone's name and a date of birth, and if you look at one of the items there, social security number, if you combine all those, you can do something very malicious with that information.
You can begin to open up accounts, withdraw money, and carry out a whole variety of fraudulent activities with that. Also, the information that you want to protect, and this again is information that we all have. Any organization, a conference, a union, any church institution that has a human resource department is going to also have access to financial account information, and then there's also credit card numbers and personal health information. Let's talk about that for just a few seconds.
Well, personal health information, I think, again, it has your name, some kind of medical record number, definitely date of birth to identify who you are. You know, if you go to a gas station, you use your credit card. A lot of gas stations, to protect and as a part of a security measure, ask you for your zip code. And that's kind of like, it's not too intrusive, but it's enough information to tell you that this card is yours. So, but with regards to the health information, we have what's out there as a security measure, HIPAA, to kind of protect ourselves. But that's, information being shared verbally or maybe on a written paper. But we have that information on the cyber world as well, where we need to protect ourselves.
Right. And so when we begin to talk about protection here, how do we lose this data? How does this, get out of our hands? And it's interesting that a breach can result, and often happens from a simple mistake. Whether it's a misplaced laptop, a misplaced mobile device. I mean, how many people have lost a phone, a work phone that may have some of that sensitive information we talked about, movable media, a flash drive. We often use flash drives to transfer information from one desk to another within the office. But if we lose these flash drives with the information still on it, that can be a problem.
Yeah, many of the corporate world have phones that are issued to them. And those phones have information that's very delicate and sensitive, and could be breached and cause harm to the actual company and definitely the individual.
Let's take a look at Andrew. How else can we lose some of this information? How can a breach result?
Well, the first one, improper disposal. Now, when you think of improper disposal, you're probably talking about hard copies, papers, and so forth. If you have a computer that's obsolete and you have information stored on your hard drive or some type of media, I guess number one thing you would do is to format that hard drive and basically clean it out. But you know, as someone who's an expert can really dive into that information or that hard drive and get information if he really wanted to. So we really need to be vigilant in disposing of such materials.
And something that would be helpful is having protocols in place in your workplace as to how you dispose of that information
Yes.
and what qualifies as being sensitive information. Another way that we can have a breach of information is through accidental email, or it can happen through regular postal mail as well. With email, though, it happens a lot of times where we begin to type the name of the person, and it populates the field automatically. It may be the wrong person, and we're transmitting some sensitive information, and if it gets to the party that we did not intend, then it's been compromised.
You know, Julio, a lot of our emails have something that's automatic at the very end that says, this message is intended for the receiver. If you are not the intended receiver, this is confidential information. Please delete it or send it back and so forth. Well, we're going in good faith that people will do that. And a lot of times, if there's some information or sensitive information there, we need to be careful. We need to be careful.
Absolutely. As we move on here, let's take a look at where the danger is. What do we need to look out for? And as you can see on this graph, 35% of breach data came from lost laptops.
You know, that's surprising to me, Julio. I mean, if you look at this graph, the large part of the pie here is a lost laptop. And the lost laptop seems like something that you could control, whether, you know, if it's stolen or not, you could still take measures to not lose it or not get it stolen. But it's very very interesting that that's the largest piece of the pie.
And you know, I think it is because it can happen so quickly and without us. You know, how many times have we had to run in from the store, going home from work, we leave our computer briefcase in the back seat of the car. You know, we're just going to go out for a few minutes, run in and get some milk or some bread or whatever. That's all the time someone needs to get in there and steal that briefcase. You know, something very simple for that is put it in the trunk of the automobile. Mm-hmm. You know, lock it up, make sure that it's not compromised. But it can happen so quickly.
You know, I was in class all week last week, and I took my laptop with me, and we would have breaks and we would have lunch breaks. But at no time did I leave my laptop there, even though I knew that the classroom was locked, the building was locked during our breaks. It was just not a good thing or good practice for me to leave it there, so I took it with me. And so those are some of the I guess the preventive measures that we can take to reduce that.
Right. So unless you're in an absolute secure environment, always keep an eye on that laptop, safeguard it. Then really quickly, the next two sources is outsourcing. That's basically third-party vendors. You use another organization to either do mailings or some other service for you. And it's worth noting that even though you usually have contracts with each one of them to make sure that that information is handled properly, like we said before, we cannot control insiders, an insider in their organization. We own that information. We're going to be responsible for it. So it's worth noting to be very careful when you choose your vendors.
You know, I think a good example might be you as a business institution have contract with a financial institution like a bank for your clients or your employees, which would be the other party as well involved.
Absolutely. And the final piece, 19%, it's electronic backup. We've talked about that. Your flash drives, external drives, whatever, be very careful when you're disposing of them, when you're done using them, that there's no information on them, and safeguard them as you would your computer. Same thing if you have that information on there. Now, how widespread is this risk? There's a number there, 563,656,459. That is the number of sensitive personal records. So that's records that were lost or involved in security breaches from January of 2005 to October of 2012.
That's very sobering. That number is very large.
It is, and when you begin, later on we're going to talk about the cost per record when this happens, when there is a security breach. It is absolutely significant, and what's worth noting is that 50% of breaches occur in companies that have 1,000 employees or less, and 26 were in companies with 11 to 100 employees. So we're not talking about large multinational corporations here.
No, if you think about it, large financial institutions would be assumed to have security measures in place so that smaller institutions or smaller companies are more vulnerable to someone who would hack.
Yeah, so more of our organizations, our church organizations, may be at risk because they are smaller and probably will be preyed upon, assuming that they don't have the security measures in place. Um, so let's talk about compliance law. So as this problem has grown, more and more states in the United States have instituted legislation to try to protect consumers from these types of breaches. California was the first one in 2003 to enact a security breach notification legislation, and now all but 4 states do not have this sort of legislation in place.
Now, we need to be careful that we don't have a false sense of security because these compliance laws are in place. This compliance law seems to take effect after a breach has occurred, and then, of course, fines and citations occur. But we need to be careful that just because these laws are in place doesn't mean that we are secure, that people aren't going to attempt to hack or breach our security systems.
No, that is absolutely a good point. Absolutely a good point. Most, like you said, are triggered by the actual breach. So, how much does it cost? In 2012, the average after a data breach was $194 per lost record. That's for each one of the records, $194. You can see $80 for notifications and $114 for the lost business, which occurs.
Which can add up. So if we break it down, $1 or $2 for customer notification, and you would think, well, $1 or $2 is not much. But if you have hundreds of thousands of employees within your system, well, it definitely adds up, because if you look at some of the other data that we're going to bring up, the cost amount would be significantly higher than just for notifying customers.
Absolutely, and maybe one of the best ways that we can explain this is, right here you see a graphic representation of what happens when there is a data breach. So we begin with the breach coach consultation. A breach happens, we're going to have to consult with an expert to see how much that's going to cost.
And the cost for that is between $250 to $300 an hour just for getting consultation.
And then we're going to have to do a forensic analysis to figure out how the breach occurred, what happened, and that also is going to be about $250 to $300 an hour. So you can begin to see that it's starting to add up already. We're going to then return to the breach coach consultation again once we know the origin of this, and so there another $250 to $300 an hour. Then, Andrew, what you're talking about, the notification and the email and the mail to the client, to your constituency, alerting them of the breach. So that we were saying was about $1 or $2 per customer, per client, per constituent.
Yeah, and after you notify them and you get consultations and do some forensic research, you have to monitor them afterwards. And that cost usually runs between $10 to $20 for credit monitoring subscriptions.
And then you add to that, you're going to have to set up a call center somewhere for the clients, the customers to be able to call in. And so that usually runs about $5 per call. So you begin to see that this is adding up.
If credit cards are involved, and many of us have credit cards, there's also the company's reissuance fee. It's $20 to $30 a credit card if they have to reissue a card, because they have to do their work, legwork, and also just their I guess their protocols on reissuing these cards.
Absolutely. And then the final step, which is public relations, kind of leads us to some of the costs that we can't quantify. But the average total cost per breach, so you see these start to add up. We also didn't talk about legal fees, which is about $400 an hour. So in 2012, the average cost per breach was $8.9 million. That was the average cost. The low cost was around $1.3 million, and on the high end all the way to $46 million. And you can see over the years from 2010 to 2012, that cost has been increasing. That is a significant amount of money.
Yeah, the cost per record varies depending on many factors. As if the breach incident was at first for a company, the cost would be about $37 per record. or if the actual extent of the breach was not thoroughly evaluated before notification to clients was made, the cost would be about $33 per record. So in addition to the data, this data, if this data was comprised due to third parties or the loss or theft of a device, the cost would be even higher.
Absolutely. And then we get to what we're talking about, the items which cannot be quantified. Public relations, your image. What is the image of the organization worth to come out of this breach, and the loss of trust from the clients?
Yeah. And technology changes in staff training, potentially thousands of dollars. So we need to have safeguards in place.
We need sometimes there are reward expenses when you're trying to find out who did this, and so you have to put up those expenses.
What's surprising to me is extortion demands. I mean, this is definitely impossible to predict, but someone is going to use that information that they have, and they're really going to get you to give it up.
It does happen. I mean, believe it or not, just like they hold people for ransom, sometimes this data is held for ransom as well. And finally, we have the cost of replacing the stolen funds or securities, whether it's your own fund or that of a client, of a constituent. There is that charge as well. So you can see how it can very easily add up into the millions of dollars with each breach of security. And it's very difficult to gauge beforehand how much this is going to cost. How much should you have set aside for this to deal with this, because it's all kind of a cascading effect, kind of a domino effect. From when the breach takes place, whether it's a hacker attacking an unprotected corporate network, all the way to the loss of productivity and revenue because of that data that's lost. We talked about the legal liability, the potential for lawsuits, the loss of trust, how much value to put on that, and the loss then in the end of that corporation, that organization, that institution to operate profitably.
Julio, when you stack up the potential costs brought on by a data security breach, insurance, which is basically the risk mitigation, is more than a smart investment. It's business critical.
Absolutely. So let's talk about solutions here. That's a great transition. What can we do? What are some of the things that we can do?
Well, what we can do is we can, first of all, identify and analyze the risk. What you need to do is you need to find out how vulnerable your institution is by doing an assessment. And of course, your financial officer as well as your IT officer will need to be involved in that.
That is critical. The other is prevention. Easier said than done, it would seem, but we talked about how there's some very simple things that we can do. And in this case, we're talking in the context of information technology, which means putting protocols in place. We talked about that. Security measures and understanding security measures available for, say, mobile phones, for laptops, and using best practices.
Yeah, and cyber risk liability insurance is a useful tool for mitigating the financial consequences of a potential data breach to IT systems. A cyber liability insurance policy for churches may cover the church as the first party. The policy also has third-party coverage that focuses on legal liability to others, such as loss or exposure of your customers' information. So if you see here, if we're talking about our institution, we have unions and conferences that can be protected, as well as all the way down to the individual membership.
And here you see graphic representation. There's a lot of information there, but what's important is to look at all the red in the middle. These are some examples of gaps in insurance, a typical insurance program. The green is what's actually covered. So if with the current insurance lines that most of our institutions have with property, general products, liability, and crime, you can see that the only way that in which loss of data would be covered would be under property, and that's only if there's physical damage. So the computers somehow are physically damaged by the property.
It's like a fire, water damage. Yeah, data retrieval is somewhat covered, but we're not talking at that level.
Right. So that's why we're talking about the need for this custom form of insurance to cover cyber liability. And when we talk about the insurance, there is third-party, you mentioned earlier, third-party coverage. What are we talking about, Andrew?
Well, in dealing with network security, the third-party claims coming out from the inability to use or access your network, the infection of another network by you, information damage to another network caused by you, theft of a third-party information, for example, trade secret due to unauthorized access to your network. This is damage to a third party.
So if it were a conference, let's say that is the insurance holder that we're talking about here, it would be the constituents whose data is lost or breached.
That is correct.
Okay. And then the privacy breach.
Well, that's dealing mainly with liability coming out of unauthorized access to confidential third-party data. Defense damages on the insured's behalf.
And then we see internet media there as well. Again, more and more we use internet media, and being able to use it appropriately. There's copyright issues involved there, but there's also coverage for that available as well. And then first party, that is the insured. So that is you, the organization.
Yes, that is the level at the conference or the union level where we would cover any kind of liability on cyber liabilities.
And there it covers regulatory proceedings, credit monitoring, first-party data loss, so your own data that you lost, network business interruption, and network extortion, which we talked about earlier. So we want to finish by asking three very important questions that you should ask of your own organization. What does your organization need to do to achieve its ministry in the age of technology?
In the area of risk control, what are some actions that you can take? These are questions I'm asking that because you know your institution best. What are some actions that you can take to protect your institution, your information, your data? And it would be to control risk as best you can. I mean, it's something as simple as protecting and keeping your laptop safe.
Absolutely, which is number two question. What tools or resources, such as IT systems, does your organization depend on? You know, what kind of protocols do you have in place? What type of security measures do you have in place? Very important questions. You talked about doing that evaluation between your financial team and your IT team. Very important.
Yeah, the carriers are going to want information to assess how vulnerable you are. And so, yeah, you'll need to work together between the financial and the IT systems.
And the final question, what financial or reputational cost could your organization face in light of a data breach or unavailability of IT systems? So if none of this is in place, what would happen?
If none of these systems or any kind of security measures are in place, then you would be vulnerable and there would be a lot of costs to you. As we mentioned earlier, millions and millions of dollars can be fined and so forth.
And from that, on that note, we want to let you know that should you have any question about cyber liability, risks that you can incur, how you can examine those risks, how you can evaluate your risks, and how you can find insurance solutions, please contact your account executive, the account executive such as Andrew, that is in constant contact with your organization. We would be more than glad to talk to you about how we can find the right solution for you. Like we said, it's a this is a growing issue and something that everyone should be safeguarding for.
We have a great question already from Christopher. Question is, how important would you say email encryption systems are in this? Will insurers recognize such a risk management tool for risk and premium purposes?
That's a very good question, and as we were saying earlier, I think as much protection as you can install in your IT systems, as cautious as you can be, it's only going to help you more and more because, like we said, a lot of these people that are out there, hackers, people that are trying to steal this data, are very smart. They know how to go around all these loopholes. So the better that we protect ourselves, absolutely, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, it's very critical. You can never be overprotected. You can always find new ways to protect yourself because your perpetrators are always going to be looking for new ways to hack in.
Yeah, and particularly if you're transmitting this very important information on a regular basis, this type of sensitive data, then absolutely encryption would make sense.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Julio and Andrew, for sharing with us today.